The first man who paid me cried when I took off my dress. He was gentle, older, wore a wedding ring he kept on the entire time. I remember that more than his face. I remember how he said thank you like I'd handed him something sacred instead of my body. I was 28, 2 months out of a divorce that had torn my spine clean from my body. I had a son who needed shoes and a landlord who didn't take IOUs or stories about deadbeat exes. I never intended to do it more than once, but shame has a strange taste. Metallic, addictive. You get used to swallowing it, and soon it doesn't taste like shame anymore. It tastes like survival, like winning. I don't talk about those men, not because I'm ashamed of the sex, but because I remember too much of the sadness. Not theirs, mine. And then there was Robert. And he made me feel like I could finally put that part of me down. Bury it. Be someone else. Not fake, just forward. Progress, not reinvention. We met at a museum gala. He wasn't the kind of man you expect at those events. Not pretentious, not loud. He asked me about the art, but listened like it was me he was studying. He was kind. You don't know how loud kindness sounds until you've been loved transactionally for years. By our second date, I told him about my past. The whole thing. I thought he'd flinch. Men always do. Even the ones who pretend not to. It's there in the microsecond between smile and blink. But not Robert. He just nodded and said, "That must have taken so much strength. You're incredible. You know that?" I cried in his car that night. He didn't touch me. Just handed me his handkerchief like we were in some old film and said, "Your past doesn't scare me. It humbles me." And for 6 months, I believed him. I believed in the kindness, in the steady rhythm of his voice, in the man who sent flowers just because Mondays were hard. And God, I wanted to believe that maybe I wasn't permanently damaged, that someone saw through the past, the decisions, the scars, and still wanted to stay. But here's the thing about survival. It teaches you to ignore your gut. You get so good at playing strong, you stop noticing when the walls are crumbling. It started with a strange message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "Be careful, please." I showed it to Robert. He laughed, said it was probably spam or a jealous ex. He kissed my temple and offered to block the number. I let him. Because when a man kisses you on the temple, it's hard to believe he might also be burying a knife in your back. But the next message came 2 days later. And this time it included a name. Maria. I knew that name. Not from my life now, from before. Maria and I had worked together years ago. We were close in that way. Women in survival become. Not friends, exactly, but co-conspirators in dignity. And the message this time wasn't vague. It was a warning. He told me he loved me too, said my story made me rare. Then he used it against me. "You're not the only one. Please, don't let him break you the way he broke me." I didn't sleep that night. Or the one after. Robert noticed, asked me what was wrong, made me tea, rubbed my shoulders. I smiled. I lied. Because I had begun remembering the other men, the ones I never talked about. Dakamdas, the fan habu, Bakamdas, Dakamdas, the ones who said sweet things while pressing me into mattresses that didn't belong to them. Dakamdas, the ones who treated empathy like currency, traded just enough of it to get access to your softest parts, then disappeared with everything that mattered. Robert was different. That's what I told myself, until the third message arrived, and this time It wasn't a warning. It was a photo. Robert, with another woman. Not Maria, not me, but someone else entirely, beautiful, vulnerable. She had that look, the one women wear when they think they've finally found safety. I knew that look. It had been on my face for 6 months. The text below the photo was simple, a name I didn't recognize. But the caption hit like acid. We're all the same to him. You, me, her. He finds broken women and makes them feel chosen. Then he takes what he wants. And that's when I realized Robert never flinched when I told him about my past, because it wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern, a weakness he could exploit, a script he'd memorized. I had spent half a year believing I'd been redeemed, that I'd finally met someone who saw me as more than my survival. But what he saw was opportunity. What he loved was the damage. And I was just the next name on a list of women too strong to fall, until someone figured out where to hit them hardest. But I wasn't crying now. I was remembering, and I was getting ready. The first time Robert called me brave, we were in bed. It wasn't after sex. It wasn't breathless or performative. He said it like a benediction, soft, reverent. He was tracing the scar on my rib cage with the back of his knuckle, the one from a surgery I don't talk about. He kissed it like it meant something, like I did. You're brave, he whispered, to survive what you did and still be this, open. I laughed then, quietly, bit down on the sob it almost stirred in me. Because only 2 kinds of men call you brave, the ones who mean it and the ones who want to break you gently so they can keep the pieces. I thought I knew the difference. I let him stay that night, not because I needed the warmth, but because I wanted it. There's a difference, and I was learning to stop apologizing for wanting anything at all. He made it easy, this man. He asked about my son, my favorite books. If I still dreamed about owning a little bookstore cafe, like I used to tell myself I would, back before custody hearings and broken leases took the poetry out of life, he made it all sound possible again. So when he kissed my eyelids and murmured that my past didn't define me, that I was brave for rising out of the fire, I believed him. Not because he said it sweetly, but because I needed to. I had built an entire life out of needing to believe the right person would see past the wrong things. And then came the unraveling. Slow, methodical, like he knew not to rip the seams too quickly, or I'd see the stitch marks. The messages kept coming, from Maria, from the new woman, her name was Isabel, I would later learn, and then from a third, Juliet, the one whose last name I recognized immediately, Juliet Shaw, wife of Marcus Shaw, CEO, real estate magnate, the kind of man who could destroy lives with a well-placed whisper. She wasn't like the rest of us. She hadn't sold her body. She'd sold her soul. Maybe traded youth and beauty for security in a gilded cage. But that's a different kind of wound. Still, it seemed Robert had found hers. Juliet's message was clipped, cold, clinical. It read, "You need to know who he is." I thought I was the only one. I wasn't. I don't think you are either. Call me. I didn't reply. Not yet. I needed time, space, a place to put my rage that wouldn't burn me alive. Robert brought me lunch the next day. My favorite. Thai from that little hole in the wall I'd once mentioned in passing. He kissed my cheek. Told me I looked tired. Concerned, but not prying. That was his gift. The illusion of respect. "I worry about you," he said. "You give too much. You always have, even when you shouldn't have to." I nodded, eyes dry, smiled the way a woman does when she knows she's being studied. I let him think I was unraveling, but I wasn't unraveling. I was sharpening. That night, I met Maria in person. We hadn't seen each other in nearly a decade, but when I walked into the dim cafe, She stood and hugged me like we were still 29 and hiding bruises behind eyeliner and inside jokes. Her eyes were tired, not defeated, just older. He used my story against me, she said, skipping the preamble, made me feel like it made me beautiful, like the broken pieces made me art. And then, when I fell apart, he said I was too much, that I needed help. I listened, not because I doubted her, but because I needed to hear every word, to understand the pathology of a man who used empathy as foreplay. He told me my trauma made me interesting, she continued. He even said, she stopped herself, then looked me dead in the eye. He said my past made me brave. I felt it then, the cold kiss of recognition, word for word. He'd said it to her too. It was a line, polished, rehearsed, a net tossed into the sea of broken women, catching only those still soft enough to want to believe. I told her everything, about the photo, about Isabel, about Juliet. And then I made the call. Juliet answered like she'd been waiting. Her voice was smooth, expensive, but beneath the polish I could hear it, the same note of disbelief, of being chosen by someone who turned your worst day into his favorite story. We met 3 nights later, the 3 of us, a former escort, a socialite wife, and a woman who had survived both motherhood and men. We met not to weep, not to rage, but to understand, and what we uncovered was worse than infidelity, worse than manipulation. It was intentional. Robert didn't stumble into our lives. He curated us, women with wounds, but not just any wounds, ones we were ashamed of, ones we hid. He loved secrets, especially the kind we whispered during sex or after too much wine, thinking it meant trust. He never wanted to save us. Hexarulid. He wanted to use our survival to feel powerful. Marblavgatetarulid. Because loving someone who thinks they're unlovable gives a man leverage. Marblavgaj. And Robert was nothing if not a master at leverage. We each had stories. Maria's breakdown, Juliet's near divorce, my son asking if I was okay, and me lying through my teeth because I couldn't explain why I suddenly cried in the grocery store aisle, holding a box of his favorite cereal. We were done being quiet. Juliet had the reach. Mariah had the receipts. I had the story. And Robert? He had no idea. Not yet. But he would, because Brave wasn't the woman who kept the past a secret. Brave was the woman who told it, out loud, before someone else weaponized it again. There's a certain intimacy in shared betrayal, a language only spoken by the wronged. It's not spoken in tears. That's the myth. The real conversation happens in the stillness, in the knowing looks exchanged over untouched coffee, in the way your hand stops shaking once you realize you're not the only one who saw the monster with his mask off. Juliet brought the cafe. Of course she did. A private booth in a place with an unlisted phone number and valet parking. The kind of place where people go to be seen, but only by the right people. We didn't come here to hide. Not anymore. Maria showed up with a folder. It wasn't even dramatic. She just slid it across the table like she was returning a library book. "This is everything I have," she said. "Every message, every date, every promise, every goddamn lie." Juliet took it without a word. She didn't need the details. She'd lived her own. But she understood the importance of evidence. Paper cuts that drew real blood. And me? I sat between them. A woman who had spent a decade scrubbing her past clean, only to be pulled back into the dirt by a man who spoke the language of healing and meant none of it. We laid it all out. Timeline overlaps, duplicate stories, mirrored compliments. He had told each of us a version of the same line. You're not like the others. You're safe now. Your past doesn't scare me. The genius of it wasn't in the words. It was in the pauses, the careful silences where he let us believe we were safe to confess, to bloom, to become soft. He didn't seduce with sex. He seduced with empathy. That's what made him dangerous. Men like that aren't looking for love. They're looking for control dressed as compassion. Juliet leaned back in her chair, her lipstick pristine. He wanted me because I was married to power. And he wanted you, she glanced at Maria, then me, because you had fought your way through hell and still had the nerve to be soft. She sipped her espresso, unfazed. He gets off on making women feel whole so he can be the one to crack them open again. There was no outrage in her voice, no fury, just fact. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared think before. This wasn't just about us. Robert had done this before. Maybe many times. We were just the ones who found each other. That night, after we parted ways, I lay awake in my bed, the ceiling fan casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. I thought about the other women, the ones who didn't have a Maria with screenshots or a Juliet with influence, the ones who disappeared into silence because they thought they were the only ones stupid enough to fall for the lie. 3 women, 1 lie, 1,000 unspoken bruises. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he'd said my name like a promise, the way he'd leaned in close during dinner, hand grazing mine, asking about the worst day of my life like it was foreplay. And I told him, God help me, I told him, there's something uniquely devastating about giving someone the parts of you you swore you'd never share again, only to find out they were collecting stories, not souls. I could have disappeared, moved on, blocked his number, let the shame settle back into my bones and pretended it never happened. That's what I would have done 5 years ago. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Neither were Maria or Juliet. We weren't interested in revenge. We were interested in truth. That's where the power was. Juliet made the call. She had a contact at a quiet, highly trafficked blog with a reputation for exposing predators behind polished veneers. Think whisper networks, but louder. Anonymous submissions. No names unless the source consented. She told me I could write the story, under my name, or not. She didn't push. Maria hesitated at first. What if this drags us all back down? What if it doesn't? I asked. I went home that night and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document. I didn't start with Robert's name. I started with mine. I'm not ashamed of my past. I'm ashamed that I once thought it made me unworthy of being loved well. I wrote everything, not just the betrayal, but the lead-up, the soft language, the stolen phrases meant to mirror our worth back to us, so he could rip it away when it suited him. I didn't write to burn him. I wrote to warn the ones who hadn't yet realized the fire was spreading. When I hit send, my hands were steady. The post went live 72 hours later. Within a day, it had over 10,000 shares. Within a week, we had 12 new emails. 12 women, same man, same script. Some were too scared to speak publicly. Some didn't want to relive it. But they all said the same thing. Thank you. I thought I was the only one. Robert called me 5 days after the story went up. I didn't answer. He texted instead. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at the screen and let the silence do what words never could, because it was never about meaning to hurt. It was about never caring if he did. And finally, he couldn't outrun that anymore. Before the story, he was admired. After the story, he was watched. There's a subtle difference. Admiration is soft, pliable. It forgives. Watching is sharp. It waits. Robert didn't know how to survive under scrutiny. His charm was a performance, and he only ever rehearsed for rooms that clapped. Now, no one was clapping. The article hadn't named him, not explicitly, but it didn't have to. Women are intuitive creatures. Some read between the lines. Others knew the lines by heart, the timeline, the details, the methods. It spread quietly, virally, like a whispered warning in a crowded room. He isn't who you think he is. Within a week, his social accounts went private. Within 2, his polished LinkedIn profile had been edited down to nothing but an ambiguous title and a school he probably hadn't donated to in years. Juliet said she heard he was taking some time off. Maria said she'd heard he was seeking legal counsel. Me? I didn't hear anything, because I wasn't listening for excuses. It's strange how predators dress like saviors. That's what makes them dangerous. They borrow language from healing spaces, words like safe, seen, respected, and wield them like weapons wrapped in silk. Robert once told me he admired my emotional elasticity. I didn't realize until later that was code for, "You bend so easily. I wonder how far you'll stretch before you snap." He built his persona out of empathy, a man who reads bell hooks, volunteers at shelters, gives TEDx, talks about emotional intelligence in modern masculinity. The kind of man you trust with your darkest chapter because he's memorized all the right lines about forgiveness. But predators don't chase power with brute force anymore. They curate vulnerability, and Robert curated us. 3 women, Maria, Juliet, me, all different lives, different pain, but all with one fatal similarity. We had once confused tenderness for safety. That was his in. He didn't tear us open. He invited us to open up, and we did. Because sometimes you want so badly to be chosen for your wounds, you ignore the way someone is cataloging them. The night the article hit 100,000 views, I received an email from a stranger. Subject line, "He did it to me too." The woman's name was Clara, 44, divorced, former addict, 2 years clean. She said Robert met her at a recovery fundraiser, listened to her story, told her she was resilient as hell, bought her a notebook, and told her to, quote, write her truth. Took her to bed after her 3rd therapy milestone and whispered, "You've already been through the worst. I just want to give you peace now." He left her the week she told him she relapsed, told her he couldn't carry that weight. He didn't help her up. He made her fall feel like failure. She wrote, "I thought it was my fault until I read your words, and I realized he never held me. He only held what I gave him." The inbox kept filling. Women in their 20s, women in their 60s, mothers, widows, women with journals full of apologies they'd written to themselves for breaking under a weight he handed them. I didn't know what to do with all the grief, so I printed it. Every message, every name, every date and detail and fragment of pain. I laid it all out on my kitchen floor, pages spread like an exorcism. My son was at a sleepover. I was alone with the ghosts. I didn't cry. I just sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by stories, and I finally believed myself. Because when you're manipulated well enough, you don't just question the man. You question your memory. Had he really said that? Was it really that cruel? Was I too sensitive? Too broken to notice what was obvious? But these women, their words were mirrors, and none of us were wrong. We had all just been targeted. Juliet did what Juliet does best. She made a phone call, not to a gossip rag or a journalist, to his wife. Yes, he had one. Not legally. He'd never married, but emotionally. An ex-fiancé turned live-in partner, conveniently out of town for much of his relationship with each of us. The classic double life. She had no idea. When Juliet told her, she didn't scream. Didn't cry. She just listened. Then she whispered, "That explains everything." She asked for copies of everything. We gave them. What she does with them is up to her. We weren't in it for the fallout. We were in it for the clarity. Robert still hasn't reached out again. Not since the text. Maria says she saw him downtown, walking fast, head down, alone. Said he looked not guilty, just exposed. And some men would rather be hated than seen. A woman from a trauma support group emailed me a week later, asked if I would speak on a panel about emotional manipulation and narcissistic intimacy. I said yes. Not because I'm healed, but because I'm willing, and that's more dangerous than anything Robert ever prepared for. Because the women he hunted learned to weaponize their truth, and the man who built his power on silence is now surrounded by voices. He dressed his harm in kindness, wrapped it in sophistication, language, charity, affection. He passed himself off as a gentleman, but a wolf in silk is still a wolf. And this time, we're not bleeding, we're howling. Burning is a temporary state. It feels permanent while you're in it. Skin peeling, breath catching, the heat of humiliation licking at your bones. But the truth is, fire doesn't last. What lasts is what comes after. The scorched earth, the ashes, the decision to stay in the ruins or build something that doesn't flinch at smoke. We had all burned once. Maria, Juliet, Clara, me. We'd been split open by the same hand wearing different gloves, soft-spoken, well-manicured, a gentleman's grip. But now, the flames were out, and what came next wasn't rage. It was reclamation. Maria started first. She launched a blog. Anonymous at first. Unloved Girls Club, she called it. A place for stories like ours, but they weren't sad. Not really. They were honest, tender, dangerous in the way truth always is when it's said without apology. She wrote, "He didn't break me because I was weak. He chose me because I was strong enough to carry the blame. I'm not carrying it anymore." The blog blew up. Hundreds of comments. Dozens of messages from women across the country. Some were from women still in it, still tangled in love that smelled like fear and tasted like false hope. Others were from those who'd clawed their way out, hands bloody, hearts reluctant. Some just wrote, "Thank you for giving us language." Juliet went further. She didn't just out Robert to his partner. She spoke to her husband, Marcus Shaw, power broker, board chair, and apparently not as oblivious as we'd all assumed. Juliet had spent years pretending, elegant, obedient, decorative. But now, she hosted a gala, black tie, champagne flutes, photographers, the kind of event that made it into columns with words like prestigious and exclusive. She invited me. I almost didn't go. But then Maria called, told me I should. "We've been quiet in rooms like that for too long," she said. So I wore a dress the color of garnet, sharp, deep, undeniable. And when Juliet saw me at the top of the marble staircase, she smiled. "Perfect timing," she murmured. "Let's give them a show." She didn't mean scandal. She meant truth. Juliet took the stage midway through the evening. Her speech was supposed to be about philanthropy, women's empowerment, the usual safe tropes. Instead, she told a story. No names, just details, enough to silence the clinking glasses. She spoke about emotional manipulation, about what it means to be adored for your scars, not out of reverence, but exploitation. She looked out at a room of men in tailored suits and women in curated silence and said, "Some men don't want to hurt us. They want to witness us hurting and call it love." She ended with, "We don't burn anymore. We speak, and we listen for each other." The applause was hesitant, confused, but I saw it. The ripple, the way women shifted in their seats, eyes glassy, shoulders straightening. Someone whispered behind me, "She's talking about Robert Lang." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. A week later, I received a message from Robert's partner. Just one line, "Thank you for giving me back my voice." She'd left him, quietly, moved in with her sister, filed paperwork, clean cut. Juliet said Robert tried calling her that night. She didn't answer. Maria said he sent a cease and desist to the blog's hosting company. It was rejected. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The three of us met once more, not at a cafe or private booth, but at a small community center where Maria had been asked to speak. A women's group, mostly older women, not influencers, not executives, just survivors, just witnesses. We sat in a circle of metal chairs and styrofoam coffee cups, and Maria told her story. So did I. So did Juliet. And then we listened as others did too. One woman said, "I thought because he never hit me, it wasn't abuse." Another whispered, "He always said my pain made me deep. I thought that meant he loved me." We nodded. We didn't interrupt. We were done performing wisdom. We were there to hear. Afterward, I stood outside in the autumn dusk, watching leaves collect like bruises at my feet. Juliet joined me. She didn't speak at first, just offered me a cigarette. I declined. Then she said, "He told me once that my silence was the most beautiful thing about me." "What did you say?" "I said nothing," she smirked. "But look at me now." We laughed. Not loud, just enough. I think about fire differently now. It used to mean destruction, chaos, pain. But it also clears, burns away rot, makes space. We weren't burned down. We were reborn. And now we're telling the story, not so anyone pities us, but so no one else burns alone. My name is Elena Grange. I am 42 years old. I have a son who once asked me why I always triple-check the locks before bed, and I told him it was just a habit. But really, it's because I used to sell pieces of myself to men whose kindness only lasted until the zipper. I used to believe that telling the truth about my past would burn my life down. I know better now. The silence was what kept me flammable. This is my story, not because it's rare, but because it's common. And that's why it's dangerous. I didn't share my past to be forgiven. I shared it to be free. After the gala, after the blog, after the inbox of aching women, I made a decision. No more anonymous. No more blurred faces or initials in place of names. I wasn't ashamed anymore. Not of the escorting, not of the mistakes, and certainly not of surviving men who believed affection was a leash and empathy was currency. I reached out to the same publication that ran the first article, told them I wanted to write a follow-up. Under my name, my photo, my voice, Mavi K. They said yes. The editor asked gently, "Are you sure you're ready for what this will invite?" I smiled. I've spent over a decade hiding from shadows. I'm ready for the light. The piece went live on a Monday. Title: Your past doesn't make you weak, but trusting the wrong man can. It opened with the story. Robert, the pattern, the harm dressed in compliments. But that wasn't the point. The point was what came after. I wrote, "This isn't a revenge story. This is a survival map. For every woman who was told her brokenness made her beautiful, but only if she kept it quiet. For every woman who mistook validation for love. And for every man reading this thinking, not all men, I hope that's true. I truly do. But the ones who hurt us never look like villains. They look like you. They speak softly. They love our damage. And then they teach us to call the pain growth. The reaction was immediate. Emails, calls, interview requests. Some of it was support. Some of it was hate. But none of it mattered as much as the messages from women who said, "I thought I was the only one. You made me feel less alone. I've never told anyone, but maybe now I can." That was the point. My son saw the article. He's 17 now. Tall, soft-hearted, smarter than he lets on. He didn't say anything the day it ran, just hugged me tighter when he got home from school. I waited for questions, for judgment. It didn't come. 3 days later, I found a note in my purse. "Mom, I'm proud of you. I didn't understand everything you went through, but I do now. It's, hey, you've always been brave." I just didn't have the words for it until I read yours. I cried for the first time in weeks, not because I was hurting. Because I was seen, not by a man trying to possess me, but by the person I'd protected for so long, and now, finally, by myself. Maria and Juliet and I still talk, not daily, but we check in. Maria's blog is now a non-profit. She hosts writing workshops for women rebuilding their lives. She tells them their truth isn't a confession, it's evidence of life after fire. Juliet divorced Marcus, not out of rage, just clarity. She said, "I spent too long being a good wife. Now I want to be a full woman." She's studying for her therapist license. Imagine that. The woman who once hosted galas, now sitting with other women in grief, saying, "Tell me everything. I'm not afraid of your truth." As for me, I wrote a book, not a memoir, a guide for women who've been manipulated by men who wear kindness like cologne, strong in the beginning, gone by morning. I called it What He Said, What He Meant. It's not about demonizing men. It's about teaching women to translate what they've been told, to know the difference between love and performance, to trust the voice inside that whispers something isn't right before it has to scream. Sometimes I think about Robert, not in longing, not even in anger, just in understanding. He didn't ruin me. He revealed me. He held up a mirror, and for once, I stopped flinching at my own reflection. I saw a woman who had bent and bent and bent, but never snapped. A woman who had survived poverty, shame, sex work, single motherhood, and the slow erosion of her own worth by men who thought gentleness was a transaction. A woman who doesn't burn anymore, because now I light fires on purpose.